Thank you, Kathy, for the nice introduction, and thank you all for having me back again. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk about migratory birds, give some information on them, and the Great Lakes and why it's an important area for them during migration, and bring Algoma into that importance because this is a very important area. And then we'll look at some of the challenges that they're faced with, some of the threats to the places that they need to stop when they're migrating. And then we will have a look at what some of their needs are that will kind of make it clear what it is that you can do to help just in your own yards. So first, the focal region of our project, the Wisconsin Stopover Initiative, we're just this big conglomerate of partners, many different partners, agencies, organizations, businesses, bird city groups, individuals that all come together to work on protection of stopover habitat, the places birds need when they're migrating. And our focal area has been the Great Lakes basins of Wisconsin. And so we're pretty much based, we work mostly along the coastal counties of Lake Michigan and also up on Lake Superior. Many, many projects have been done as a result of the work at hand, and I won't go into those today, but sometime I'll have to come back and tell you about them because they're really exciting land protection and research and other projects that have been launched as a result of the Wisconsin Stopover Initiative. So we recognize, similar to other groups working on stopover conservation, we recognize 5 different bird groups. So we have raptors, and you just learned if you were at the live raptor show earlier what a raptor is. So those are the birds of prey that catch with their talons, and this is a broadwing hawk that migrates at the same time as songbirds. Shorebirds is another bird group, and we have a widgeon down here representing the waterfowl. Waterfowl is basically swans, geese, and ducks. And water birds, such as the American white pelican, also great blue heron, the sandhill cranes, rails, gulls, many different species, the grebes and the loons, those are all water birds. And then the bird group I'm going to focus on today, we call the land birds, as represented by our mascot bird, the rose-breasted grosbeak. And the land birds are pretty much the songbirds and other birds such as woodcock, which is really a shorebird, but it uses the same forested habitat as the songbirds do. And it's birds that mostly need forested areas. We don't know much about the grassland songbirds when they migrate. They don't sing at that time of the year, and they're down in the tall grasses, and it's very difficult to study them. So we know very little. We do know that they may use some of the shrubby habitats in migration that they don't use during breeding season, but that they share that habitat during migration with forest songbirds. Okay. So if we think about migration, if we're talking about songbirds that migrate, they come up north to Canada and the upper Midwest to breed in the summer, and they go down south in the winter. Some are short distance migrants, and the short distance will hang out down in the southern U.S. along the Gulf Coast. Others are long distance migrants, and they go down into Central America and even into South America. And some are really small, like the ruby-throated hummingbird is a long-distance migrant. Another name we have for that is neotropical migratory bird. And the neotropical, it's just jargon for neo meaning new, and it refers to the New World or the Western Hemisphere, and tropical meaning that these birds go down south of the Tropic of Cancer to spend the winter. And so a short distance migrant would be a robin or a gray catbird, just as examples. And a long distance, rose-breasted grosbeak, the ruby-throated hummingbird, and many of the other birds that maybe don't necessarily eat seed, but need other resources that aren't available here in the wintertime. And so if we think about when they're coming up north in the spring, many of them will fly up from South America across the Gulf and land along the southern coast here, or they'll come up along this coast. And this is a map of the forest cover types of the U.S. So this is where we have woody cover. And in the southern part of the United States, they have lots of choices. There's lots of forested area available. But when they get up into the southern Great Lakes, their choices become less. And this is where it becomes important to provide habitat for them that doesn't currently exist. And we're trying to increase some of the habitat and to establish a network of sites all along their route. They need places to stop all along their route from where they winter to where they breed in the summer and back again in the fall. So this is a very energetically demanding time in a bird's life. The scientists estimate that as much as 85% of their mortality occurs when they're migrating. So they don't die as frequently, nowhere near as frequently when they're on their wintering grounds or when they're on their breeding grounds. It happens when they're traveling. And it's because of all the different risks that they face while they're traveling. So energetically, the long distance migrants, such as this black-throated blue warbler here, need to feed on insects. They're what we call obligate insectivores, meaning they must eat insects. They can sometimes switch and eat fruits, but they cannot crack open seeds or take advantage of too many other food resources. And so their dependence on insects is what prompts them to migrate so far so that they can go down where there's insects available in the wintertime. And it's what they feed on and what they feed to their young when they come up here to breed in the summer. And so they're challenged to find enough resources to build mass. They have to build mass in order to have enough fuel to make their long flights. And when they stop after a flight, they need to feed. One of the things you'll see them do, if you've ever seen a fallout of a flock of birds, like in the wake of a storm in the spring, they will all drop out into the bushes and trees, and they will just be actively moving. And what they're doing is just picking insects right and left and fueling up again because they're very hungry after that long flight. And they eat things like mosquitoes and mayflies. The mayflies and midges that hatch as adults, they emerge from the waters as adults. They spend their larva time, their immature stages in the shallows of Lake Michigan and other bodies of water, and they emerge as adults in the spring. And I noticed at the hotel where I'm staying there, they said, please shut the door fast because we have lake flies. They don't bite, but they're pesky. And this is what's coming out in the spring, and what the birds, when they arrive at that time, and that's what they're feeding on. And so they help keep those populations in check, and that's the source that they're looking for. Let's see, here we have an immature eastern bluebird that is feeding on Virginia creeper berries. Those are the blueberries. It's a beautiful plant, and it gets this fall color. This is a fall photo. And this little guy needs to gain a lot of weight for his first migration. So he's taking advantage of a very high energy food source. The black-throated blue warbler, we're not sure who's the prey and who's the predator on this guy. And this Cape May warbler, now warblers, we consider them obligate insectivores. That a Cape May is going to forage insects off of the leaves of trees, especially in the upper canopy of the forest, and particularly from conifers like pines and spruce and fir. And we do have a few Cape Mays that nest in Wisconsin, but they're primarily up into Canada. It's a very northern breeding species. And here, this guy is taking advantage of sap coming out of a hole drilled by a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And it's a very opportunistic food source for this bird, meaning that he saw a food source, it was high energy sugar, and he's taking advantage of it. And this is not very well documented, but it does happen, but it's rare. Okay. So one of the things that they need is cover from predators and also to protect them from inclement weather. And cover is extremely important. And these birds, and I haven't said this before, but these birds migrate at night. They fly high above the tree level, and they take off at dusk, and they land when first morning light hits. And they fly at night mainly because their predators, such as this broadwing hawk that's migrating at the same time, would just have a field day picking them off during the day. The broadwing hawk and other hawks migrate during the day. So they've altered their migration to have protection from that. So as soon as that first morning light hits, they have to head for cover. And they could be anywhere. They don't necessarily follow flyways. They could be out over Lake Michigan, and often are, and we have radar that shows masses of birds out over the lake at dawn, and they all scramble to either Michigan side or Wisconsin side seeking cover. And so right along the shore areas, we get higher concentrations of these birds than elsewhere. And it's not that we don't have them further inland, like in Madison. I've seen fallouts of warblers and flycatchers in Madison, but it's just not as great of concentrations as what you get here along the shore. And every study that has been done, there's only been maybe less than 10 that have been done, but of all of them, they all have the same result, that concentrations are significantly higher along the shore than 3 miles inland. And the other thing they need is a vertical and horizontal structure so that you have diversity. If it's all trees with like a mowed understory, then only some of the birds are going to be able to take advantage of that upper canopy. Many birds use the middle canopy, other birds use the understory, and they like to forage on the ground. And they need cover in all those levels. And they need horizontal structure as well, such as a fallen log, dead woody debris, leaf litter. The sparrows like to scratch in the leaf litter and stir up insects out of it, especially on a cold morning when the insects aren't moving very much. And so those features of the habitat is important, and in some cases it's been lost. There are many threats to stopover sites, and one of them we talked about earlier is that there's been a big loss of habitat in some parts of the areas where they migrate. And the habitat that's remaining has been fragmented, and it's also, the structure has been altered from invasive species, for instance, buckthorn filling the understory, and buckthorn is an invasive species, it's not native. It has berries, the birds will eat the berries, but it acts as a diuretic. So instead of gaining mass, they lose weight and they don't get the energy they need for migration. So the community composition and structure change that has occurred to some of our woodlots and some of our remaining forested areas is of concern. And their water quality degradation is a factor because of those insects we talked about that emerge from the shallows of lakes and rivers. If the water quality is not good, then the species diversity among those insects will be low, and there will be less abundance of them. And then, of course, collisions with towers, reflective glass on our homes, buildings, and the light issue is an issue for the big cities with the skyscrapers like Chicago, where they have a lights out program during migration because the lights are so high on those skyscrapers and the birds are drawn to them, and then they get into a track where they're flying around the buildings and then eventually they crash into something and die. So lights out programs are real big in the cities, but not any concern at all in a place like Algoma. So if we think about migration from a bird's point of view, and we're coming in off of Lake Michigan, and this is central Wisconsin. This was taken in central Wisconsin, I'm not sure where, but it looks a lot like the landscape around here, where we have woodlots, there's some hedgerows, little farmsteads, and row crops and farm fields. And the birds are going to head for the cover. So maybe we're going to put down right in here. This seems like a nice group of trees here. And there's a big flock of us, and we're going to forage. And pretty soon we're going to run out of things to eat, and we have to move. We have to keep moving through the morning to refuel up for our afternoon rest before we migrate again in the evening. So then we've got to fly across some open spaces, and that can be hazardous to us because of the predators that are available, or maybe it's sleeting out, or maybe there's some kind of weather that's a factor, high winds, for example. And so maybe we'll follow this hedgerow down and we'll get to another woodlot. Eventually we might work our way back to what looks like might be a nice river corridor where we can just hang out and keep moving down the corridor and foraging as we go. And we call these types of isolated small wood areas, we call those fire escapes. So just like a fire escape provides a service for us, it saves our life. It doesn't do anything else for us, but it gets us out of the burning building, it saves our life. We only use it in those emergency situations. And the same is true for birds. They may not frequent the smaller areas. If they can get to a bigger area, they will. But when they need it, it's vital for them. It's a vital resource. And unlike most conservation programs that look for the biggest and the most pristine to protect, we value the fire escapes because we know how important they are in the landscapes where they occur. Then there's the convenience store. This is one-stop shopping for a bird. This would be similar to when we're traveling. We stop at a convenience store. We may not be able to get exactly what we need, but we'll find something that will get us through to the next stop. And so this might be a city park where a bird stops. They might be able to hang out for a day, maybe a little more than a day, but they won't be able to stay if there is, say, a weather system moved in that was not good for their travel and it stayed for several days. They would have to still move on. They wouldn't be able to stay in the habitat. And the example that we have of this is Harrington Beach State Park. This is a quarry lake, so it doesn't have the insect emergence. The only insect emergence is right along the lake. The birds will pack in here in some years in the thousands, but they can't stay for very long because they quickly deplete the resources, their prey resources, and then they have to move on. But it probably allowed them to be able to move on to the next place. Whereas if there was a bird that was in a serious situation of needing to forage, they might not make it to the next spot if there wasn't something like a convenience store to stop at. And then we have the full-service hotel. And these are used often, and these are preferred, and this allows a bird to hang out for a week or more, and they can move from habitat to habitat. There's a mosaic of different kinds of habitats available for a variety of resources, and the whole flock can get its needs met. And here we have Peninsula State Park, and really all of Door County together is a nice big full-service hotel, and the birds come in off of Lake Michigan and they do their morning flights across Door County. All the birders know this is where one of the places, the hot spots that they head to in the spring. And we have documentation of Peninsula State Park and how important it is for the tens of thousands of migrant birds that can go through in a year there. So one of the things that birds do when they're migrating and dawn hits and they're out over the Great Lakes is they cue in on geographical features. For example, any kind of point of land, a little point here in Michigan, this big peninsula that sticks into the lake here for Door County, and Algoma is right about there. That's what these birds are going to look for, and they tend to concentrate in even higher numbers there than in other places along the shore. And I don't know why the topographic features are of such interest to them and what draws them, but they seem to like to land in those areas and forage in those areas and then work their way inland. And so that's one of the things that makes Algoma special, and that makes the Great Lakes in general special for these birds when they are traveling. So now we're going to switch over and talk about why are our backyards important for birds? What can we do for them in our backyards that will help? And backyards are everywhere. And one of the things that we recognize in the Wisconsin Stopover Initiative project is that we can't buy enough land for public preserves or even private preserves to establish the kind of network of sites that these birds need across their entire migratory routes. It's just not practical to think that we can do that. And so what we do is we try to engage private landowners to join us and to add their parcels and their acreages to the preserves that we do have and that we are able to protect. And just by making a few changes in your yard, a big difference can be made. And by the way, not all the birds, but a lot of the bird pictures that you're seeing in this PowerPoint are Mr. Bob Coombs' pictures. He has donated thousands of pictures to me, and his photographing is one of the best documentations that we have of why Algoma is important for birds, and that the birds are here in big numbers. Every bird group is represented here, and they pour through here all the time. And so a little bit more habitat might help them to stick around longer, would draw them to your yard where you could enjoy them and see them. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to watch birds if you haven't experienced it before, where you can sit inside your nice cozy house and watch them outside the window, foraging and chasing and singing and doing all the birdie things that birds do. So here we have a backyard of a friend of mine, Miss Geraldine, person that's very near and dear to me, and she did something like the Bird Bistro idea, which is Mary's and Kathy's idea of working in little patches in the yard and building it out. And Geraldine did the same thing, working along the edges of her yard first, and then moving into the yard and developing some patches. And she has a mixture of native and non-native, but more natives than not. And she already had some large oak trees in her yard, which the birds really love, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then she enhanced things by building a brush pile. All the sparrows love the brush piles. They love to hang out in them. You can get white-crowned sparrows, white-throated sparrows. You heard that one sing that Bob played earlier. They sing, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada," and it's a beautiful song. And the song sparrows and chipping sparrows, all of them love to hang out in the brush pile. You do need to be aware that mice and chipmunks also like the brush pile, so you don't want to put it near your house. You want to have it out in your yard. And some people that I work with refer to it as rabbitat. So you want to be careful about where you place it and how big you build it. It could get really big. I've seen some giant ones that are over my head and filled with all the sparrows and so many other critters. But a brush pile is an easy thing to do when we're trimming up our trees at certain times of the year, and just leave a few stacked and see what turns up in it next time migration happens. She provides a water source, and this is really important. And she's got some feeders out for the short distance migrants and the residents that also help draw birds to to the yard. You know, the birds all seem to know to follow the black-capped chickadees. The chickadees are very smart. They know where all the resources are, particularly on cold, chilly days. They know where to find food. And the other birds follow them and learn from them where to go to get food. I've seen many flocks following chickadees. The chickadees are always in the lead, and the other birds, the migrants that are struggling on a cold, blustery day, they are following along behind and getting to good resources because of their association with chickadees. So drawing them in with the seed can also draw in the birds that don't eat seed but migrate. And I mentioned oak trees earlier. And this is Geraldine's, another view of Geraldine's yard, and it kind of looks like a big oak savanna in her neighborhood. And there's these big, beautiful oak trees that were kind of open grown, and they don't really have lower branches, so it's really good to build up some brushy understory under them, which is what she has done. And but the birds will hang out in these oaks. And Vicki Piaskowski, who is a colleague of mine, she's retired now from Birds Without Borders, she did some research on what insects are hanging out in the trees where the birds seem to forage the most. The birds in her study in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, forage the most in oak trees, oaks and willows. And she found that the oak trees had 5 caterpillars and 2 leafhoppers per branch. So they're rich with insects. And then Eric Wood, who was a graduate student at UW a few years back, looked at the length of the petiole of a leaf, that's the little stem of the leaf, and he found that there was a distinct relationship between what trees birds forage in and the shorter length of that petiole. And the reason for that is because the bird can easier reach out to the leaf if the petiole is short to get the insects off of it just from standing on a branch. It doesn't have to fly out and hover to get those insects like on a maple tree with a long stem. And that expends a lot of energy to have to do that. And so they save energy, and they prefer getting the easier food sources that are available on easy to reach oak leaves. Same is true for willows. Very short petiole on the willows. And so a bird could just perch here and easily grab insects from all the leaves around and not have to fly out and spend that energy. And for willows, we had 4 leafhoppers and 2 caterpillars plus 2 flies per branch. And who doesn't like pussy willows? And I have kind of a clay wet spot in my backyard, and I planted some pussy willows there. And I just love them. I love to go out and get some of the dried catkin pussy willows when they look like this, and bring them in the house and put them with some other flowers, and they just really dress up a bouquet. And the birds will keep the insects at bay from them. Okay. And dogwoods are another thing. The pagoda dogwood, red osier dogwood is a favorite of mine. Silky and gray, these are all versions of dogwoods that are native to southern Wisconsin and great to plant in your yard, and they can serve as ornamentals. And they should be easy to grow, provided you're putting them in the right soil types. And you need to check with your local nursery when you purchase them for what kind of care they need. Once they get going, they shouldn't need any care. And you do have to be careful of red osier dogwood because it can become invasive. It can really spread, become like a monoculture across your yard. And so you do need to be careful of where you place those. Oh, I wanted to tell you the story about the thrushes. This is a wood thrush singing, but the Swainson's thrushes in particular love those red osier dogwood berries. When I did my surveys out on Lake Michigan and the Michigan side, the red osier dogwood grows like crazy over there, and I could count on, every time I went in the fall, I could count on Swainson's thrushes calling and feeding in those dogwoods. So that's a really neat bird to bring to your yard. The viburnums are beautiful, great ornamentals. These are native shrubs that get berries. The birds tend not to eat them until late winter. So the early returning birds are going to take advantage of this food source. And birds in the late winter that are here all winter long will take advantage too. And they get these pretty red berries, and they have a beautiful blossom in the spring, and just a very graceful, gorgeous shrub that can grace your yard. And there are many different varieties. Nannyberry and maple-leaved are two of the more popular kind. Arrowwood is also popular. And then just wild berries. Some people's yards, like mine, just have them growing, and they just come in and we let them grow. And then the birds enjoy the berries, and so do we. And here we have a white crowned sparrow feeding in, a white-throated sparrow feeding in the in some raspberry bushes. And there's our immature bluebird and the Virginia creeper. So these are some vines that are good. The American bittersweet, riverbank grape are all used by birds. And wildflowers, the milkweeds are especially important for all the birds. They'll use the silks to line their nest in the spring from the old milkweeds from last year. They will eat the seeds in the fall. Both resident species and migrant species will take advantage, and of course the hummingbirds and bees and butterflies will drink the nectar in the summer. Coneflowers and daisies, all of these are great to plant for nectar sources and for seed. So we talked about brush piles and how birds will use those. And the cover, conifers. Some of the conifers get little berries on them. This is actually a red cedar tree. And I don't know that I would plant red cedar this far north. I live down near Janesville. But I have these big red cedar trees in my yard. And some years they get under stress and they get these little berries. They're blue. They're not really berries. They're called an aril, A-R-I-L. It's just the name of the structure. And it is a fruit, and the cedar waxwings love them, and so do a lot of the other birds. And the junipers are what will get those arils too, and those are good to plant. That's perfectly fine to plant at this latitude. And we need to protect birds when they're in our yards by reducing reflections on glass. A bird doesn't know that this is a glass wall. They see habitat, and they fly towards it, and they can get seriously injured and even killed, and they often do. And it's up to, I brought the figures with me, but it's up to 1 billion birds a year in the U.S. alone are estimated by the American Bird Conservancy to die as a result of collision with glass. And so doing something to protect them from those reflections is important, and you can talk to me afterwards. I won't go into it because I think I'm running out of time. No? Where am I at? Oh, okay. All right, then I'll mention a few things. You can go to the Wisconsin Night Guardians for Songbirds website, and I'm going to give my website at the end, and I have all the links on there that you would ever need for this topic. And they have good information about the different types of decals and other things you can put on your windows. The latest thing that they have found is parachute cord. Hanging parachute cord every so often across a window. You hardly see it, it's so thin, when you're looking from the inside out. But the birds see it, and they don't fly into the glass. And so, and if you don't like them waving in the wind, you can anchor them at the bottom. It still works. But you could also leave them free, and when they blow in the wind, that also is a deterrent to the bird to fly that direction. Keeping cats indoors. And now I do need to look at my figures, because whenever I start to repeat these figures, and I repeat them over and over again, I start to doubt myself because they seem so unreal. but they're true. These are true figures based on studies that scientists have done. And they develop methods for estimating for across the whole U.S. from sampling in different cities and rural areas. And for cats outdoors, the American Bird Conservancy considers them the #1 human cause for threats to birds. They are globally responsible for the extinction of 33 species. In the U.S. alone, tens of millions of outdoor cats will approximately kill 2.4 billion birds per year. 2.4 billion birds per year. And even if they're a well-fed cat, they still hunt, they still kill, it's their instinct, and the birds don't recognize them as a natural predator and have no defense against them. They're particularly good at getting nests because cats can climb trees, and the nests are just up there in the tree, and of course the adults could fly away, but the young cannot. And I noticed that the Bird City table has the Keeping Cats Indoors brochure, which is a wonderful brochure. I usually give it out when I go places, but I'm out of them right now. But I highly recommend it. It's full of great information, and it has good figures on why it's important for your cat to be kept indoors and how they can be kept safe, and they live so much longer when they're not out roaming free. And then the water source. I showed you that Geraldine had a bird bath, and if I have time, I'll tell you a story about all her bird baths. But if water is running, dripping, or moving in some way, making bubbling noises, that is even better at drawing them in than just a stationary bird bath. It is important to clean the bath every week, not to use any chemicals to clean it, just rinse it out with vinegar perhaps, and put fresh water in for the birds. And Bob showed you that he has a heater in his bird bath, so he keeps the birds coming all through the winter. And that's a great thing to do as well. Water features are very important. They not only need to eat, but they need water just like we do too. This is a great water feature. We hold a workshop called the Grosbeaks Galore Birds on Your Landscape workshop, where we train people how to deal with their yards and create habitat for migrating birds. And one of the persons who's attended a couple of these workshops, her name is Hallie. She lives near West Bend, and she has been working on 1.5 acres of land, that's her yard, and doing kind of the same thing as the bird bistro idea. We never called it that. I think it's just excellent that you have captured a sort of a what do you call it, a theme of what to call it. A trademark of what to call this kind of work. And she started out just doing little patches of planting some native shrubs and native trees, and then as those grew up and they got bigger, she decided she wanted to put in this water feature, and you can see it's very complex, and it's really, this was quite a piece of work that she did. I think it's gorgeous. You see the water falling over rocks, so it's going to make noises that will bring in the birds. And the birds can access the water because there are flat places near where the water, you know, like if a bird was sitting up here, they couldn't exactly reach the water to bathe or to grab a drink. And so it's important to provide access for them. And she made it nice for her guests to be able to walk up the stairs and walk through all of her plantings. And I think this is so beautiful, and yet her next door neighbor had fits. She didn't like what this woman was doing at all to her yard, and so Hallie was very challenged by this neighbor. You know, what are you doing? Why aren't you mowing your lawn? And Hallie mows, you know, the places that are still grassy, but most of her yard isn't grass anymore. It's pretty places like this. And Hallie's been working with her, trying to get her to understand. And I haven't gotten an update lately, but last I heard, she was still working and trying to get the woman to come around and understand. And I can't imagine seeing how beautiful that is that anyone would object. Can't imagine. But we all have our different ideas of what our neighborhood should look like and our yard should look like. And sometimes it's just a matter of changing how people view their surroundings, and bringing in new value systems. And it's great when neighbors can talk to neighbors. Neighbors talking to neighbors can do so much more than somebody like me from the DNR standing up here yammering on. And I am just so impressed, and I know Mary and Kathy have both been talking with their neighbors and spreading the word to all of you, and they have much farther reach than I can from sitting up in that government building in Madison. So what can you do? We'll just do a little recap. You can plant native plants, of course, and provide fresh water. Build a brush pile. Keep your cats indoors. Reduce window reflections, so important. And start a birdathon team is another one, which is really fun. Doesn't have anything to do with work outside. You go out and you bird, and you collect money for the species that you count and donate it to the Bird Protection Fund. This is the Natural Resources Foundation program, and they fund a lot of the bird conservation that's going on in our state. Without the Natural Resources Foundation in these last 10 years, I would say we wouldn't have half. We wouldn't have Bird City, first of all. They're a big funder for Bird City. And my program wouldn't exist, and so many other, the Kirtland's Warbler program wouldn't exist. There's so many other bird programs that would not be here if it wasn't for their support and keeping us going. And you can just, if you're not a birder and you don't want to do a birdathon team, you can just donate to the Bird Protection Fund. That's an easy thing to do. And this is their website, wisconservation.org, and you can get more information there. And I talked about the Grow Speaks Galore workshop. Our next one is coming up in Door County, the Ridges Sanctuary, in late summer of 2017. It'll either be in August or early September. So watch for that, and I'll be sure to forward the notice to Kathy. And it's just a wonderful day where we have a combination of indoor presentations of different experts, some that know about insects, some that know about native plants, some that have done restoration work on their own property and share their pictures and their stories. And then we go out on field trips into preserves where there's been restoration work done, and we see how it's actually done. How do you control garlic mustard, for example, or how do you monitor the birds in your yard after you've put in all of these wonderful features? And we make it festival-like. We usually have native plant nurseries there with plants for sale, and we have landscaping consultants on hand, and there are booths up everywhere, and it's very festival-like and a really fun day. We give away a lot of great door prizes too. And then you probably have seen my booklet that's out on the table there. It's free. And if anyone wants to get more of these booklets, I have lots of them, and there's no cost for them. And if your organization or your group would like to have several copies, just let me know. There we go. And this is the homepage from my website. It's wisconsinbirds.org/migratory. Wisconsinbirds.org is actually the Wisconsin Bird Conservation Initiative website. And we are a spin-off project of that effort. And if you get to their website, the word Stopover is up at the top, and you hit it and you get to this page. Or you can just put in the /migratory and you get here. And for all the things that I talked about, all the links that I talked about, just go to the resources page. There'll be a drop-down menu when you click on this, and choose links. It's the first page, and you choose links. And that page has all the different links in it, and it explains each link. And so you can find out about the cats indoors. You can find out about the bird collisions. You can get to the Bird Protection Fund, anything that I mentioned in this and more. How to build a brush pile, you can find that on there. Okay, so that's all I've got for you today. If there are any questions, if we still have time.
We're going to go ahead into the next part, and we'll take questions.
And then we'll take questions at the end. Okay.